Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to today's webinar on the new Adaptive SHSAT. We are going to get started soon, but I want to give everyone a chance to join, so we have about a couple of minutes in case you need to grab anything. For those of you joining us now, welcome. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. I just want to give everyone a chance to join us. We'll be talking about the new Adaptive SHSAT tonight.
Dasha, can you also put up the March schedule so all the parents see?
It's at the end of the slideshow, so I'll have it
Okay.
at the end.
Let's do it now just so parents have access to it.
I wouldn't be able to go all the way back unless you need it now.
Mm. Okay. Perfect. Can you make it a little bit larger?
I cannot.
Let's,
You can see.
while we're waiting for parents to join.
For those of you who are just joining us, today we'll be talking about the new SHSAT for this year. We're just giving everyone a couple of minutes to join us, so if you need to grab anything, some pen and paper, or anything else you might need, and then we'll get started soon. I will be talking through what the new SHSAT would look like, what some of the changes are, what to expect from it, as well as how Kweller Prep can support you through this process.
If anyone is interested in signing up for the March SHSAT test prep, we're going to put the sign up in the link.
All right, I think this is a good amount of people. I'm going to get started. So, welcome everyone to today's webinar on the 2026 Adaptive SHSAT. We're going to talk a little bit about what is the SHSAT, what you can expect from it, how it's changed recently, and what this year's exam is going to look like. And lastly, how Kweller can support you through it. So first, what is the SHSAT? For students that are now in seventh grade, you can get started to prepare for this exam that you'll take approximately in November of this year. So it's a 3-hour exam, and it's split equally between ELA, reading, and math. And there's about 57 questions per section. On the right-hand side, and I think this is really important, I have the list of the schools which you test into using this SHSAT. And when you apply, you get a chance to rank your schools, and the order matters. And I think a couple of important statistics here to look out for is, first of all, the number of students that are accepted. Some of these schools are much, much larger. Now, this has no bearing on whether it's a better or worse school. There's just difference in class sizes. And so you may want to think about if you want your child to be at a bigger school or a smaller school. I think also location matters greatly as to where your child will be able to commute to. These schools are spanning across all 5 boroughs. We've got schools in the Bronx, in Queens, Staten Island, Brooklyn, and Manhattan. So think about location as you think about where to apply. And of course, everyone's questions are always about the cutoff score and the scores required for each school. Now, as you'll notice from the most right-hand column about the raw scores, they're all fairly high. The highest is Stuyvesant, which takes a really large amount of students each year, but the approximate raw score cutoff is about 90% there. Which I know that the cutoff scaled score might not mean much on its own. That's why I include the raw score to show what that would mean that your child would need to get about 90% of the questions right. And that is tough, but it's our job at Kweller to prepare your child for that. And I have at the bottom also another statistic here that last year about 26,000 students took the SHSAT and about 4,000 received offers, which means that the acceptance rate to these schools generally is about 15%, which is tough, but with enough prep, it's very doable. I would note also that these acceptance rates differ by school, as you'll see, because of the difference in the class size and how many applicants each school gets. So you can understand that some schools that are further away from centers may get less applicants. So, what's changing? This year, the SHSAT is going digital. Now, this is something that started and was launched last year, and the Department of Education is saying that it's become pretty successful. Students will be taking this year their exam on a computer, either in school or at home. And I believe that that depends on how you register and what accommodations your school or your district or zone offer. I looked into whether or not students can still take it on paper because I know that going digital is a wary topic for many, and their accommodation for paper tests is very, very limited and would require a medical reason or some other reason. If you don't have a device or a computer that would work, many of the locations provide computers. I think many of them provide computers and don't ask you to bring your own at all. So technology is not a reason to take it on paper. They really are pushing this digital version. The next major change is that it's a computer adaptive style. They call it CAT. What that means is that questions get progressively more difficult as you get them right. So I think this is easily seen in the math section. If you get a question right, your next question will be a little bit harder or about the same difficulty. And then the question after that, if you get that right, gets a little bit harder, and so forth. And if you get questions wrong, it'll bring you sort of back to easier questions and easier questions. So it's designed to test how far you can go. It doesn't get so advanced that you're suddenly doing high school level math. So it's not going that far, but it does give students a chance to kind of stay within their range or advance. This also means that you can't go back to questions. The only exception to that is that questions within the same ELA passage you can alternate between. And this is something new. We don't know how it may affect scores at this point. It's just something that we want students to expect. And we want them to be prepared, especially through their prep, that if they start seeing that questions are getting more and more tricky, they shouldn't be nervous and worried, thinking, oh no. That's actually a really good sign. It means that they've gotten the last couple of questions right. And what we'll also see is some new styles of math and ELA questions. And that might mean nothing if you don't know what the old style questions are, but it just means that they're varying up their question types, which also might have an effect on how students are scoring and why it's super important to prep early. And something that Kweller Prep does is offer classes starting in March so that we can build those foundations that students need to be able to take any style of question that is thrown at you. We not only will prepare the material, but also the testing strategies and how to approach these different questions because it can be tricky and we never want someone to get a question wrong because they didn't understand how that question was worded. Okay. Next, how does this change how we prep? The biggest takeaway that I've seen studying this new exam is that students should really practice online. I know something we've done in the past is knowing that even if students are taking a test digitally, we'll do a lot of homework or prep on paper, partially maybe to avoid as much screen time and so forth. But what I've noticed is that if we're 100% set that this test is going digital, unfortunately or fortunately, we need to adapt to that as we study as well. We have to adjust to how we're going to read and underline and annotate on a surface rather than pen to paper. It is different, and making that adjustment all the way at the end, right before you take the test, is not good. So I always encourage starting early, whether it's reading your readings early or doing your homeworks even for school online or on the online platforms. Next, students should practice different question types, not just the traditional multiple choice or written. So we'll see later on what some of these questions might look like. But the big takeaway from this, and I'll repeat this later again, is that without having as many traditional multiple choice questions, we can't rely as much on some strategies we teach often multiple choice, like guessing and checking, rounding, and other things that use the answer choices to help us. Instead, we actually have to truly understand the material, and that can be tricky. And the grammar section also remains, which for many tends to be the toughest section because grammar is something that's not typically formally taught in schools. So how we prep starting now is starting to learn grammar concepts formally. It's not something your child might be learning in school, so we have to start early and build that foundation. Now I'll say that there's a limited number of grammar rules, so it shouldn't be overwhelming, but it takes time to really practice and master them, even though you might say, well, my child writes with great grammar when they do their homework assignments. They may know how to use it, and it may be intuitive, but when the question asks you for a specific grammar concept that you don't know by name, that's where the trouble begins. So we want to make sure that students are prepared. And as we'll see when we look at the Kweller programs, one of the things that our programs design is specific classes and lectures that are dedicated to grammar, which is something you never see in school and rarely see in other places. Grammar is important, and even though it's intuitive and we know it and we write with good grammar, we need to really study it. So let's talk a little bit about what this ELA and grammar portion looks like. It tests both traditional reading comprehension through passages, multiple choice questions, and as we mentioned, there's also the grammar section. I have here 2 tidbits of what the passages might look like. And this is very similar to what prior exams have looked like. So some of what we'll practice is using old released exams as part of our curriculum to help students practice all of these different texts and different question types. So you can take a look here. There may be expository, explanatory, argumentative, or functional texts, and those can include essays, speeches, opinions, essays about art or literature, biography, memoirs, journalism, history, science. They really do cover and span a lot of different topics, which tends to keep students engaged and interested, but often sometimes poses a trouble when students say, well, I don't understand this concept in science, or I don't remember learning this part of history. And we say, it's not about the science or the history, it's about the reading comprehension of this passage. And that's something that we really practice and prepare students for. And on our right-hand side are some of the genres. I won't read them all out, but some of the big ones that we see that tend to be troubling are sometimes poetry, because of the metaphors involved and the symbolism often. And we practice a lot of poetry, which I think also translates to a lot of other reading comprehension. Um, Fiction tends to be the more exciting and easy to read section for many students. Mysteries or satire can be challenging because it really asks us to think outside of the box. And we talk through so many passages, work on summaries, reading strategies, how to annotate effectively, how to underline effectively. How do I approach a passage just when I start looking at it? So we'll talk through all of the foundations of all different genres. And Kweller's courses are specifically designed to tackle every type of passage we might see. And we really do dedicate enough time and can always go back and have more material and lessons for any type of passage or section that is particularly challenging for a student or class. So here I have some examples of what the sample ELA questions may look like. I didn't include the passage because I didn't want us to go through necessarily the answers through it, but to get an idea of some of the question types that students may see. So in question 1, they give us a sentence from the paragraph and asks us a vocab question. What do the words endurance and impossible convey? And here it's showing us how we can use answer eliminators on this online platform to still use the process of elimination where we can. And question 2 asks, what sentence from the passage best supports the idea that birds seem to be capable of making prolonged flights? And this is what we call a quote question, where the question asks us to find a quote that supports a certain idea. And so one of the strategies that we teach at Kweller often is identifying question types. And what we're able to do after taking practice tests is diagnose what type of questions students are often getting wrong. And students learn this to say, okay, next time I come across a vocab question, I know I get these wrong. Let's go back and review how I would approach this particular type of question and maybe allocate a little bit more time to it, knowing that it's a struggle spot for me. And we talk about every possible type of question and how to approach them. Different questions have different approaches, unsurprisingly. Okay. Talk about the grammar portion. So some of the topics that are tested in grammar are language misuse, missing or unnecessary details, missing or inappropriate transition words, a missing or unclear introductory statement or concluding statement, confusing or illogical organization, or other errors. And it tests a lot of concrete grammar rules. One of the biggest challenges that we often see in grammar is students saying, well, it could be any of these. I mean, I don't know what they think is missing or unclear. Maybe it's clear to me, or maybe it's confusing to me, but not them. How do I know? And what we do to teach this is we rely on specific grammar rules. When a student says, I think this is the answer, I ask them, how would you have rewritten this? Or what is the actual mistake? Not just what is a little bit confusing, but what is actually wrong? And part of studying this grammar and these rules, I've noticed that students become much stronger writers. Even though writing is not tested on this exam, it will be tested on future exams and is definitely applicable to school, which is, I think, another bonus of starting prep early, to build these foundations to not only help this exam, but also all of the studies that you're doing in school and all of the future exams you're going to take. And I think grammar is a really big foundational part to it. So let me show you some samples of what these grammar questions might look like. And this also had a passage I didn't include it. I just wanted to show us sort of what the different question types might look like. Question 2 says, which revision of sentence 8 uses the most precise language? And that begs the question, what does it mean to be most precise? I mean, this seems like a subjective question, but it's not. There are specific rules, and it's one of the things that it's hard to know unless you're preparing and you know the tips and tricks. So we at Kweller will teach all of these tips and tricks and what it means to be precise in our language and so forth. Question 3 below says which sentence should be added before sentence 11 to introduce the idea. So this is an example of a missing introductory statement. And so we have to understand what is the purpose of an introductory statement. Again, this applies to their writing, not just their reading. Introductory statements, right? They need to introduce the topic that will be discussed in that paragraph. It might need to transition from the prior paragraph. It has to make sure that it's related to the information in that paragraph. And so we will go one by one in the beginning at least, through the answer choices to figure out how does this connect or how does this not connect? And how can I also compare the answer choices across each other to determine which one is better? And what we turn what seems to be subjective into much more concrete answers. Another example here on the right, which sentence in the paragraph should be revised to correct an inappropriate shift in verb tense? Now I chose this question because I think it's a little bit more familiar in terms of the grammar concept it's testing. So we know what verb tenses are. We know past, present, and future tense. And so when they say there's a shift in the verb tense, they're saying that somewhere in this paragraph, what initially started in one tense changed to another tense. And we know that a grammar rule is that that shouldn't happen for the most part. So we can take a minute and read this paragraph. You may need to zoom in, but I'll read it out loud as well. For 14 years, James and his dad have had a tradition of attending Yankees games.
Yeah, Dasha, yeah, zoom in, please.
Let me see. Do this. Moment.
That's fine. You're off the share screen, so just go back to share screen.
Yep. Here we are. Which sentence in the paragraph should be revised to correct an inappropriate shift in verb tense? So now I'll read the paragraph out loud. For 14 years, James and his dad have had a tradition of attending Yankee games together. But James is leaving for college next week, and he is agonizing over the fact that attending school in Pennsylvania and working there over the summer meant no more games with his dad. One night, as James is packing his clothes into boxes, he hears a soft knock on his bedroom door. As soon as he opens the door, James sees what is in his dad's hand and feels a rush of joy. His dad is holding a bus ticket for a trip home on a weekend in the spring so that father and son can attend a Yankee game together. So if anyone wants to, if any of the students are joining us as well, if you want to take a guess and put in the chat, I'm welcome to do that as well. But what we would show students is how I would approach this is by identifying all of the verbs here and figuring out which ones are not aligned. And the answer here was was sentence 1. Because in sentence one, it says him and his dad have had a tradition, but he is leaving and he is agonizing, which are both in the present tense. And working there over the summer meant we suddenly have switched from the present to the past tense. And so that is our highlight for saying that's not right. That's our mistake. So the answer has to be A, sentence one. So if you got that wrong, no worries. It just means it's time to sign up for a Kweller class. There's plenty of time to prepare and so forth. So here's another good question. Which sentence in the paragraph contains an error in construction and should be revised? Now, what does it mean to be an error in construction? On the bottom, there's a note that says the error-specific construction, which means it relates to how the words and phrases are placed in a sentence to represent the relationship between ideas. Well, if you're not sure what that means, you're not too far off. It's vague. That's not a real answer. Sometimes error in construction intentionally keeps it vague because it doesn't tell students exactly what kind of mistake they're looking for, which makes this a particularly tricky question. I'll read this out loud, and if you guys want to take a stab at the answer here as well, you can. It says, in 2007, visitors to San Francisco, many of whom were attending an international design conference, had booked almost all of the city's hotel rooms. Looking for a way to earn some money, 3 air mattresses were rented out by roommates Joe Gebbia and Brian Chesky. The 27-year-olds put the mattresses in the loft of their apartment and charged $80 a night, for which guests received a bed, breakfast, and internet access. Soon, the entrepreneurs realized that they could capitalize on their idea in a much bigger way, and they established Airbnb, a company that offers around 6 million rental listings in more than 100,000 cities worldwide. So, any thoughts on which sentence is wrong? So we know that construction doesn't mean much, but it does mean that something about maybe the order or the relationship between ideas in a sentence are somehow wrong. So I know I read this as an entire paragraph, but you may want to take a look at each sentence independently. Take a moment, take a guess, and then I'll share our answer. Those of you who said sentence two, you're right. It might be because it just sounded off to you. And that's often a good start for answering these kinds of questions. This is your intuition. This is your just general knowledge of grammar rules. But to be more confident in our answer, what we'll teach at Kweller is why is that answer wrong? And not only why is it wrong, how would you fix it? Because knowing how to fix an answer and catching the mistake really solidifies your answer. And these questions, they get tricky. So what's wrong with sentence two is that when there's a section in the beginning looking for a way to earn some extra money, comma, what comes after that comma must be who or what did that action. So who or what looked for a way to earn more money? So here's my sample revision. Looking for a way to earn some extra money, roommates Joe Gebbia and Brian Chesky rented out 3 air mattresses in their apartment, blah, blah, blah. So these are some examples of what the grammar section might look like, some of the questions you can experience, and some of the rules that we will teach in our Kweller classes. Okay. Next, we'll move on to the math section and what we can expect from there. Now, the math section, it's going to be a mix of multiple choice and fill in the blank questions. And there are some new styles of questions that I'll show in a moment. Now, topics that are covered, they're all up to 7th, and I say occasionally a little bit of 8th grade math. but nothing advanced. You don't need to go beyond your grade level. You just need to make sure that you do understand the topics in your grade level. The questions do become multi-step and they get harder. This is part of that CAT style. They will get progressively harder. But there are still no calculators, and I did check, students are allowed to still have scrap paper or a digital notepad, which is essentially the same as scrap paper, because I wanted to make sure, because in math in particular, we want to make sure we're able to diagram. And I looked at some of the sample questions they gave, and they do have opportunities for you to show your work. So here are some of the examples of the new math questions. So in addition to the traditional multiple choice and grid type of questions, students can see something like these. They're not, and I want to stress this also, they seem unfamiliar, but they're not harder. What they're doing is really just opening up the potential for more than one possible right answer and just test your ability to be precise, be clear, and check your work, which really you should be doing for any question, including multiple choice. So the sample question here is not the difficulty that you can expect on the test, obviously, but it was meant to really show the platform. So the question here was, are these numbers even or odd? Move them to the correct box, and they give you 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you have to drag each of the boxes for each of the numbers into the category. And so your end result would be like the bottom, where even numbers you would have 2 and 4, and odd numbers you would have 1 and 3. Now, like I said, this is obviously not the difficulty of the questions you'll see on the exam, but it's an example of how they may want you to use the platform, where it's drag and drop, or move up, and we'll see in another question about like moving shapes onto a graph or something like that. At Kweller, students will have the opportunity to practice similar types of questions on different platforms. So by the time that they're done prepping at Kweller, they will be familiar with any type of question that they might see. Here is another good sample question that I thought was a little bit trickier. I believe this question asks for a rotation or a translation of the shape, something that students will learn in 7th grade if they haven't already. But what I noticed is that you basically have 4 options of these purple triangles on the left, and you drag and you drop it exactly to the correct place on the grid. And as I mentioned here on the right, this is a tricky question. Because if I move that shape 1 unit left or right, I would be wrong. So I want to make sure that I'm, graphing it correctly and checking my work. Now, generally, from what I've seen from their testing and such, the program isn't meant to trick you or like make you wrong. You will have an opportunity to like check your answer and move your cursor around if you need to. It's not meant to mess you up, but it does mean that you have to look carefully. You have to count your boxes and all of that. And so what this does is, by not having all the questions be these traditional multiple choice questions, means that students need to really understand the concept. This tests more of your knowledge of the underlying foundational idea, rather than, are you a lucky guesser? Or were you able to narrow it down and you got it on a 50-50? And for many tests, we teach so many strategies on how to tackle multiple choice and how to get around it and do the least amount of work. But here, we're actually teaching more so the underlying concepts, because it won't be entirely multiple choice. Okay. A couple of other sample questions and some of the work that they showed. This is an example of if students had scrap paper, how they might use it, or if they had their digital notepad, as well as to give you another glimpse of what the question might look like. So here they tell us that $1 is 7 lorgs, and it's also half a dalt. Malik has 140 lorgs and 16 dalts. If he exchanges the lorgs and dalts to dollars, how many dollars will he receive? So this is a good example of a ratio question, a common topic tested on the SHSAT math section. First, you'd want to convert the logs to dollars, then you'd want to convert the dolts to dollars and add them up. What this sample question also shows that I want to highlight is that some questions are multi-step. You may not be able to do them in your head, or maybe you can, but you really need to keep track of it. So as questions get harder, expect to have to do multiple steps. And on its own, that might not sound hard, but keeping track of your work is often a challenge. Another thing that we teach at Kweller, which I think often goes, which is often overseen, is organization and handwriting, particularly in math. There are countless times where a 1 looks like a 7, or your multiplication looks like an addition sign, or you forgot a decimal, or your comma looked like a decimal. So many things and so many places to go wrong. And that especially is going to play a bigger difference when it's not multiple choice. Now, if it's multiple choice, you might say, wait, I was off by a decimal. Maybe I got 5.2 instead of 52, but 5.2 is not an answer, so it's got to be 52, right? Simple enough when you have multiple choice, but when they're not there, you can't rely on that. So we really do practice the penmanship, the organization, how to plan our steps for solving a question before we do it, and so much more so students are prepared. And obviously, while this is applicable to this exam, it also plays a much bigger role as students grow older. In high school math classes, there's only going to be more steps, and you're going to add in new symbols you've never seen before, and so much more. So building good foundation of organizing your work in math, having neat handwriting when solving equations, using the correct format and symbols and everything else really sets students up for success in the future. And I think that that's really important. Some other sample questions and some examples of how they suggested solving. You're allowed to highlight and annotate on their program, and so you can use their tools. So here it says the sum of two consecutive integers is -15. If 1 is added to the smaller integers and 2 is subtracted from the larger integer, what is the product of the two resulting integers? If you want to solve it, actually, I'll give you a chance to do it. I don't have their full work, but we can sort of do it together. And what they started with was annotating what each different section means. So two consecutive numbers. Notice they wrote that as x and x plus 1, because we know that consecutive numbers are numbers that follow each other directly one after the other. And when you add them up, and we can do that together, what is x plus 1? That's 2x plus 1. And that equals -15. Now there's an added bonus. We have to be careful here with using our negatives, part of our organization. So you can use that equation to help you solve for what those numbers are. I see some people might be solving this. Yes, so question from the chat, as I've mentioned, the test is digital, but students can still receive paper or a digital scratch pad, which is basically like what seems like would be like an iPad that you can draw on with a kind of stylus or pencil. But yes, you will still have an opportunity for scratch work. So someone in the chat got our answer here that x would be -8, and so the two consecutive numbers are -8 and -7. And what happens? 1 is added to the smaller integer. And remember, smaller and bigger might sound different for negative numbers. So remember, the smaller one is more negative. So if 1 is added to the smaller one, it goes from -8 to -7. And 2 is subtracted from the larger integer. And subtracted, remember, we're going from a negative and you're subtracting, so it's becoming more negative, goes to -9. And some of you guys are getting it. The product is -7 times -9 is giving us positive 63. Now, a lot of places we could have gone wrong here. Any which mistake we made on a negative sign could have gotten us the wrong answer. And if this is an example of a bubble question. You didn't have answer choices here. You had to make sure that you were following it exactly to get positive 63. Okay? Sample 2. Jenny starts a game with twice as many marbles as Kiko. Jenny gives Kiko 5 marbles, but she still has 10 more. How many marbles did Jenna have to start with? And something that's helpful here is that they marked it up for us again, which is a good example of how we would mark this up. J is 2 times K. Jenny gives K 5, so that's, you can look at their second line down here. J minus 5, it means that K gets 5, but she still has 10 more, so K plus 5 plus 10. So how many did she start with? So you basically just have to move these numbers around. J minus 5 equals K plus 5 plus 10. So it seems like if we move that over, then J equals, in the bottom equation, J would be 20, and then you move it up to the top equation, so 2 times 20. The answer would be 40. So if this isn't making sense to you now, don't worry about it. This is just samples, just to give you a glimpse of what it might look like and the work you might want to show. But I give the answers for those who wanted to jump ahead and take a look. And so we see an example of where we have no answer choices and an example where we do have answer choices. Okay, this brings me to our last part of this webinar, is how we can prepare students for this. Why Kweller? Well, with so many changes to our exam, it's important to start studying early. It's becoming a little bit harder. So students need to be prepared for a wide variety of questions. And starting early is the best way to do that. One thing we really pride ourselves at Kweller is having small class sizes, which allows for very individualized support. Our tutors are amazing. Not just talking about myself here, but I've noticed that all my colleagues are very, very great to pay close attention to students and the class progress. We have a lot, because our classes are small, we have a lot of flexibility to adjust as needed. So sometimes I did have to stop our curriculum to spend extra time figuring out a foundational concept that a lot of students were missing. I can't move on until we figured this out. And other times, since everyone's on the same page and is really good at this one section, we can run through it quickly and spend time on something else. So we're very good at gauging where the class is at and adjusting as we need. But at the same time, we do have a very, very clear and organized curriculum. So we do know what we're doing. We're following a schedule. We have a plan so that we are able to cover all of the material. And Kweller works year-round rigorously to prepare these curriculums and prepare all the material in a way that allows students to prepare in a timely manner, not be overworked.
Yeah, and I want to add also, our digital platform, we have been working on this for a year already.
Yeah. We'll cover all of the topics, from their very foundation and the easiest questions you might see to the most challenging ones. I always say it's so important to start with the early classes now to really build this foundation, because many times I see students join our classes right up until, a month before the exam, and they're trying to do the tough questions, but they can't because they never learned the basis of them. So it's important to start early, learn the basis, and get to the hard stuff without the stress and time restrictions of it. And this not only helps for this exam, but this will help you build those same foundations that you're going to need for math next year, no matter what school you go to. And some of these topics, they might be familiar from school. Others might be totally new. You won't know until you try. We teach skills at Kweller that really help beyond this exam, right? We're not teaching just for you to get this exam, done well, which, is a part of it, of course, but it's skills that will translate to any exam that you'll take in the future. For example, in ELA, underlining, annotating, active reading skills, identifying question types, all of these things I teach them to my fifth graders, I teach them to my eighth graders, I teach them to my 12th graders. Because it's the same skills that just get harder and harder. And so the earlier that you can build this foundation, the better. And same with math, the foundations help prepare for grade 8 and high school. So as Francis asked before, I just put it up here, and in the next slide, I also have our summer offerings, but here are our March start and May start offerings. You'll see the options for different days. We have Zoom and in-person options, which I think are great. I think the in-person classes are really good especially for younger students.
Сегодня, значит, как началась история про эту мамку.
Да, София, дай это.
Значит, я же тут всем говорил.
Sorry about that. I really like the Kweller office, and even though it seems like the classes are long, they are 4 hours, we really make it fun and interactive. We have snacks, we take breaks when needed. There's something fun about being collaborative and working with other students, right? This isn't your traditional classroom. It's a small room. Students really get to know each other. They make friends. I think it's fun. There's also the Zoom option. We do also try to keep it interactive. We don't have snacks over Zoom, but I think it's still a great option. We do, as you'll see in the schedule, take a number of practice tests, which are really important, both to start diagnosis and to practice those skills in that time setting. You'll also notice one of the things we do is separate our lessons so we have focus areas in every class. And we also do carve out time for spring break, Memorial Day, and as we get later on into the summer and so forth, have those breaks. So you don't have to change your schedule around or completely change your vacation for Kweller, right? We will accommodate you. And of course, we will also work with you, and you can work with the tutors directly in case you need to miss a class or some kind of emergency comes up. We are very accommodating, and that small class size makes it so much easier. Tutors can work with your child independently if they miss a class, for example, or find a way to make it up in another class. So we really try to my biggest takeaway here is that we really try to cater this to you, and we provide all of the materials both in that digital format, and I believe some of our materials are also hard copy if you want to do your homework.
Yeah, we provide both. So you have the hard copy as an option, the digital testing as an option. So you'll have everything at Kweller. If you sign up, you should sign up for the March start just to get like all that extra. And then if you absolutely can, then do the May, June. But the March start, if you do March, summer, and fall, there's a 90% success rate with getting into specialized. So keep that in mind also. The metrics, the numbers. If you sign up for March start tonight, we will gladly take you in. We have space, we have seats left in the class. And Dasha, if you could just go through the March start a little bit in more detail. Or I don't know if you can zoom it if you're able to, just so parents understand what they're getting themselves into with the schedule.
I will in a moment. I also wanted to point out, as you mentioned, the kind of later coming up classes. So we also have the summer offerings here. We have summer camp that runs June through August, and then there's a later start summer camp that meets 4 days a week in the afternoons, both also in person or over Zoom. I've taught summer camp for many years, and I don't know, it was fun. We really do make it more fun. It seems like you're telling your child, like, you don't get to have a fun summer because you have to go to class, but class, students enjoy coming. Even at 8 a.m. and at 8 in the morning, we do make it engaging. We do make it fun, so it's a lot better than it seems. But as Francis said, I definitely recommend March start or May start because especially summer, if people are traveling or have plans, do not wait until the fall to start studying. They're going to start a new semester. School is going to get harder. They still have any extracurriculars they have and so forth. It will be overwhelming, stressful, and not as successful. So while students have the opportunity now to start, it makes a huge difference. And it's a lot more low stakes to start once a week, take your spring break, you have a little bit of homework in between. It's a lot easier than starting all the way at the end. So that's what I have for these. Our first class, as you asked to speak more about the March start, our first class starts at the end of February, February 26th, 28th, or March 1st. It just depends on which option you select, whether it's Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday. So if it's Thursday, you would start on the February 26th. If you start on Saturday, it's the 28th, or Sunday, March 1st. And it takes you through June. And I think it's the best low pressure way to start your prep and have students be prepared also for their state tests that they're going to be taking around the same time. We'll start with a practice test to really get a diagnosis of where students are at. Then we start with a whole class dedicated to reading, a whole class dedicated to math, a whole class dedicated to grammar, and then we take another practice test. So our classes are specific by subject, but we will cover all of the subjects. And as I mentioned, our tutors are able to adjust. We definitely see when a class is wavering to one side or another, and we make sure that no one is left behind. Our practice tests do use this new platform that gives students harder questions as they go along. So we do our best to mimic the testing conditions that students will see. All right. And like I said, if you can't make it to the March for some reason, then there is the May and June start, which is also a good way to start a little bit later if you need to, and then work your way through the summer and the fall. Do not wait till the fall is the biggest takeaway. Okay. Thank you. My email is over here if you have any questions about anything I discuss. It's Dasha Hunter Fordham at Kweller. I've been a tutor here for almost 10 years now, actually. And if you want to see all of the courses that we offer for the SHSAT, you can look at the link below, kwellerprep.com/tutoring/SHSAT. And yeah. And I will stick around for any questions. I'll leave up our summer camp offerings here for a moment, and then I'll go back to the March ones as well. Francis, was there anything you wanted to add?
I just wanted to go into more detail about how you've taught summer camp and how summer camp goes and the March start. That would be it.
Sure. A little bit about how summer camp goes. It's very similar to our other kind of spring or fall programs where we do practice tests, reading, math, grammar, practice tests, reading, math, grammar. And so students will have homework. I think we tend not to require them to do sort of daily homework, knowing that, if they're leaving, they're going to have to be back here the next day. But we do say, there's a certain amount of homework you want to do within the week, and then we'll review it. So something like that. I have one concern that people have often is, is the homework going to be overwhelming? I mean, my child has a sport that they do and an instrument they play, and they have all these extra classes they go to. We very, very I almost want to say never have received complaints that the homework is too much. And if that is a situation for some reason, we adjust, right? We are very, very flexible with each class to do whatever works. We always say, allocate a little bit of time on the weekend. It shouldn't take you more than an hour or so. And it's different for summer program where we do meet every day, so there's a little bit less of an expectation for students to do homework on a daily basis, but they might have more time one day or over the weekend or something like that. And part of our course, and I'll go back to the March for this, is we'll go over our reading or math or grammar section from the particular test that we took most recently. So this way we go over every question that students have taken on the practice test. And then we'll go into their homework review and additional lessons and additional material. So students have plenty of material to work with. They will take numerous practice tests. They'll have homework packets. They'll have other packets. And it's all designed to ideally not overwhelm them. But especially starting early, pace them out so they can do a little bit every day and be prepared. And so I believe someone mentioned about the options. So the options here are Thursday, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning, and Sunday afternoon. I believe there's a small typo with our numbers, but there are 5 options here. Each class runs for 4 hours. So if your child, and I would think about, when does your child study best? Is it in the evenings? Maybe Thursday is a good option. Do they study best in the mornings or afternoon? And so forth. None of our materials repeat. And thank you, that's a really good question. Everything is a continuation. We design this specifically so that students can start in the March, do our summer camp, and then as we'll see, there will be fall programs, and none of those materials will be the same intentionally. Yeah. Good question. These classes are also designed for 7th grade because they, start now and then they'll be taking the test in a couple of months. I would reach out specifically if you want to consider starting earlier. We do say sometimes it might be a challenge because the material is fairly new and we don't want to overwhelm students, but that can be discussed as well. Usually we say starting around March in 7th grade is the best way to go. My email is here, and the link to all of our programs is here. Another question is the different types of questions. So as we kind of discuss the different questions from the sample questions I put up, those are some of the new kind of styles we will see. There aren't a ton of released, examples, so we integrate what we have seen and what we can anticipate into our practice tests. But the topics that are tested will be the same. They're not switching up completely their material, so old practice exams I think are still very helpful in that sense. But the way that they are asked, for example, less multiple choice questions is what we'll expect. How many less multiple choice, we don't know for sure, especially knowing this CAT process that they're getting progressively harder as we go on. You don't know if the progressively harder ones are, I would think that they would become less multiple choice, but it might be a mix. So what we may have expected before was that there was a set number, I believe it was 7 grid-ins and then 50 multiple choice. It won't be a direct split like that anymore. And reading and math are weighed the same. We're not sure yet as to how the specific questions, I know as they get harder, will they be weighed differently? Unclear on that one. I tried to look up the exact grading scheme and it seems very complicated in terms of the statistics that are involved. which is why I say not to rely too much on, the old scaled scores because that's going to change. But what we do find important is that reading and math are weighed the same, which means it's important that you kind of give them equal time. Yeah. So other questions here, it is definitely, challenging to think about mock scores, but we do our best. And we always say what we want to see is improvement. And wherever you start to be able to work faster, to get more questions right, to understand and ensure you work for all of them. Whatever the numerical score is, we can't compare it to anything. What we can compare it to, however, is those percentages of how many raw questions do you get right. And so if we can get those numbers up to about 90%, that's all we can ask for. And the scaling and everything else, that will play itself out. So I don't worry about scores. I always worry about my students understanding as much as they can and understanding why the answers are the way they are. We do anticipate, so the old exam did have a number of experimental questions. We believe that that's going to stay the same. However, that makes no difference. Students always ask about experimental questions, and I say you have no way of knowing which one's which. So pretend they're all real questions, right? That's kind of the purpose of experimental questions, for you to not know. So I say it doesn't matter. But yes, we do anticipate they'll still be part of the exam. The timing remains the same, which means that the number of questions remains the same. I have that up here on one of our first slides, which I think is very helpful to look at those raw scores and really consider what schools you would be interested in applying to, tour the schools, read about the schools. What you thought might be your top choice might not be your top choice, or schools you might have never considered might be more interesting than you thought. So think critically, and we'll do our best to have students be prepared for any of these schools so that they get their pick of the litter. Okay. Thank you all so much for your time. I'll stick around for any other questions. Otherwise,
Yeah, you guys can type any questions you have and you can sign up for March. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording.